Hello, it's good to see you all. Thank you for coming out on a Thursday night. It really, really is good to see so many people here. And thanks to those of you who are online. We're glad you're watching with us. No, you can't hear us? Let's see, is that better? Okay, well, I'll just schlump a little. That always works. So my name is Barb Wyndham, and I'd like to welcome you on behalf of the Beth Am JIAC, which is the Jewish and Israel Advocacy Committee. Beth Am JIAC's mission is to unify and mobilize support for the security of the State of Israel, to counter the growing anti-Semitism, and to promote respect for Jews in the United States and beyond. To achieve our objective, we encourage congregants, we educate congregants through emails and informative speakers like this, and we send out timely alerts to take action when the events warrant. Beth Am JIAC is honored to host former Congressman and CEO Ted Deutch this evening, and we'd like to thank our co-sponsors, who are Peninsula Sinai Congregation, Congregation Kol Emet, Congregation Beth Ami Israel Committee, Congregation Beth Jacob, Beth Am Women, Congregation Emek Baracha, and B'nai Israel Jewish Center in Petaluma. We appreciate your support, and we'd like to also thank all those who have helped make this program happen. That includes Seth Brisk, Rabbi Heath Wattenmaker, Rabbi Gary Greenberg, Jeremy Ragent, Liz Weisben, Zoe Brinner, Ellen Ratner, and all the greeters. Tonight's talk will be followed by a Q&A, will be followed by a Q&A, and during that period, just raise your hand, and either Jeff or Andrew will come around with a mic and find you. After the program, there will be a reception in the social hall across the way, and please make sure to thank anyone you meet who's Beth Am woman, who they made the amazing treats, all homemade tonight, and Beth Am men will be pouring wine, so you're in for a treat. And now I'd like to turn it over to Rabbi Heath, who's been a great mentor and support for Beth Am JIAC.
Erev Tov, good evening. I'm Rabbi Heath Wattenmaker, and it's my pleasure to welcome tonight's speaker, Ted Deutch, the CEO of the American Jewish Committee, and all of you to Congregation Beth Am. As we get started, I want to reiterate some of Barb's thanks and also offer a few of my own. First, to our Beth Am Jewish Israel and Advocacy Committee, particularly Barb Wyndham, Jeff and Maddie Carmel, Joanne Donsky, and Helene and Andrew Lipton. You all have been working tirelessly to make this happen for at least, I think, a year and a half, by my calculations, to bring this evening into being, and your dedication, commitment, and persistence, particularly the persistence, is truly inspiring. Also want to offer thanks to Rabbi Gary Greenbaum, who was our consulting senior rabbi last year, for helping to make this connection to AJC and Congressman Deutch, who also was a teacher of mine way back in graduate school. Another thank you to our co-sponsors, Peninsula Sinai Congregation, Congregation Kol Emet, Beth Am Women, Congregation Beth Ami Israel Committee, Congregation Beth Jacob, Congregation Emek Bracha, and B'nai Israel Jewish Center in Petaluma. How many of you are here all the way from Petaluma? I'm just curious. Anyone? All right. Okay, well, thank you. And to those of you watching online, greetings and thank you for your support. Also, want to thank Seth Brisk, the San Francisco Regional Director of AJC, for all of his work in helping to make this evening happen. I'm a rabbi. I have to start with a few words of Torah. I think it's requisite. We are in Parshat Pekudei this week, and at the very end of Pekudei, the Mishkan, the portable sanctuary that the Israelites carried with them throughout their wandering from Egypt to the Promised Land, the construction of the Mishkan is finished. And Bezalel and his fellow artisans give over all of the incredible works that they have fashioned with the abundant gifts and contributions of all of the Israelites. They hand all these finished things over to Moses for the final assembly and completion of the Mishkan. Moses takes each of these sacred objects and assembles and erects them, each in their proper place. beginning with the tent itself, which will house the Holy of Holies, and then moving first to the most holy object, the Holy of Holies and the objects that will go within it, moving outward, ending by erecting the courtyard all around the Mishkan and the altar, establishing the outline of this holy space, this holy tent. It's a big tent, but it's got a perimeter. The text reads, "And so Moses had finished the work, then the cloud covered the Ohel Moed, the tent of meeting, and the presence of God filled the Mishkan." As some scholars point out, at the Mishkan, God meets with Moses to instruct and lead Israel. Friends, as we come together tonight to learn about the important work of AJC, specifically focusing on their strategy to counter anti-Semitism, we do so in the midst of one of the most painful chapters in our American Jewish experience, certainly perhaps one of the more difficult moments in our Jewish experience more broadly. But when we come together, when we work together, when we build up individuals and communities and relationships between our community and other communities, as AJC so beautifully does and has done for so many decades, then holiness enters our midst. When we hold each other accountable when we hold others accountable for their words and actions, when we educate the ignorant, so too holiness enters our midst. It is my honor to introduce our speaker this evening, Ted Deutch. Ted is a lifelong Jewish and pro-Israel activist and assumed the role of CEO of the American Jewish Committee, AJC, in October of 2022. He joined AJC following more than 12 years of service in the United States House of Representatives, representing Broward and Palm Beach counties in Florida. In Congress, Ted served as the chair of the House Ethics Committee, a senior member of the House Judiciary Committee, and a senior member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, on which he served as chair of the Middle East, North Africa, and Global Counterterrorism Subcommittee. He collaborated closely with members of both sides of the aisle to advance the security interests of the United States, Israel, and their allies. Ted authored legislation advancing U.S.-Israel cooperation in energy, agriculture, technology, and trade, and fought back against efforts to delegitimize Israel at the United Nations, championed U.S. foreign aid investments that promote global human rights and the protection of religious minorities worldwide, and focused on the transformational opportunities made possible by the Abraham Accords. He also passed federal legislation to crack down on companies that financially support Iran's nuclear weapons program and confront Iran's dangerous activities around the world. As a founding co-chair of the House Bipartisan Task Force for Combating Anti-Semitism, Ted spoke passionately on the House floor, confronting colleagues who invoked anti-Semitic tropes or disparaged Israel. In response to rising hatred on social media, he helped launch an interparliamentary coalition to combat online anti-Semitism with legislators from Canada, Israel, the UK, and Australia. And when the Claims Conference was negotiating with the German government, Ted met Chancellor Angela Merkel to plead for greater assistance to permit Holocaust survivors to live out their days in dignity. Ted also served as the co-chair of the Congressional Hellenic Israel Alliance, as well as a member of the Congressional Caucus on Black-Jewish Relations, the Latino Jewish Congressional Caucus, and AJC's Transatlantic Friends of Israel Interparliamentary Group. Ted first gained national recognition as a Florida state senator when he introduced and passed the nation's first law mandating that public pension funds not be used to advance Iran's illicit quest for nuclear weapons. His work led to an invitation to testify before the U.S. Senate on Iran sanctions, and he continued his efforts to curb Iranian aggression and prevent Iran's development of nuclear weapons throughout his tenure in Congress. Prior to holding public office, Ted enjoyed a successful career as a commercial real estate attorney in Cleveland and Boca Raton. Ted has long championed the priorities of the Jewish community, from his summers at Camp Ramah in the Poconos to his Israel activism at the University of Michigan and Michigan Law School, where he chaired the Hillel Governing Board, something we have in common. I did that at USC as well. He later served as a lay leader with the Jewish Federations of Cleveland and South Palm Beach County, and a member of both UJA's National Young Leadership Cabinet and AIPAC's National New Leadership Network. Born and raised in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, Ted is the youngest son of the late Jean and Bernard Deutch. Ted and his wife Jill have lived in Boca Raton, Florida since 19 98, and have 3 adult children. And as I said at the beginning, Ted will speak tonight about the development and implementation of the first ever U.S. national strategy to counter anti-Semitism and what its future might be. So on behalf of the clergy of Beth Am, our entire community, and all of our partners, Ted, welcome to Silicon Valley.
Good evening, everyone. It's really great to be here. I want to, before I begin, I want to just acknowledge some key individuals who made this night possible. But before I do that, I want to acknowledge anyone who came in here from Petaluma. I'm going to add my thanks, understanding the geography a little bit more now than I did when I arrived in the Bay Area a few days ago. I am really grateful for those of you who made that trek. I want to thank all of the sponsors who helped make tonight possible. Thanks to Cliff Goldstein, the important leader in AJC in so many ways, who really helped conceptualize this event from all the way down in Los Angeles. Thanks, Rabbi Wattenmaker, for your leadership and guidance. Thanks to Rabbi Art Nemitov, for your leadership. I know that Rabbi Greenbaum was instrumental as well in helping to arrange this event. I'm grateful to him, to Barb Wyndham and Joanne Donsky of the Jewish in Israel Advocacy Committee, a committee that takes an enormous amount of time, I am sure, and that work and your leadership and the importance of what you're doing at this moment is so critical here in this community. And because this community is so important in the United States and ultimately around the world, the contributions that you're making to advance Israel's place in the world and to strengthen the global Jewish community is immensely important and very deeply appreciated. I want to also thank our own Seth Brisk and Teresa Drenick for their many, many daily contributions to the work of AJC here in the San Francisco area, and of course AJC Regional President Jill Silverman and our regional board members who are here. Your leadership is invaluable. I want to start with a story. First, I want to acknowledge that we meet now 538 days after October 7th, after what was a blow to the gut of the Jewish community around the world. What happened on October 7th impacts us still. It meant so much to us personally then, the vulnerability that we felt in the immediate aftermath that then continued for days and months, and now close to a year and a half, and the fact that as I stand here, as we gather here today, there still remain 59 hostages in Gaza, again, 538 days after Hamas committed their brutal atrocities, their slaughter, and the kidnapping of these hostages. Here's the story. I did an event on Long Island recently. For a couple of you who heard me tell the story over the past couple of days, I apologize, but it so aptly captures the moment. We did an event on Long Island, and there was a room full of people just like this, and we had questions and a good discussion, and a woman in the back of the room stood up and she said, I want you to understand something. She said, I've been very involved in my community, very involved. And then she proceeded to tell us all of the ways that she was involved. The fact that she packed food for the hungry and she helped clothe the homeless. She worked at the library. She taught kids to read. She went on and on. She escorted women into an abortion clinic. On and on. It was a very long list. Like, I would say, like I'm certain, so many of us here. And then she paused and she said, but I want you to understand, since October 7th, she said, I am all Jewish all the time. That's the moment in which we find ourselves. That's how so many of us feel. We're at a moment where what happened on October 7th simultaneously made us step forward and declare that we are here and we in our community will stand in defense of ourselves in a country and in a world that so often felt like it was turning against us. And yet, at the same time, a moment where we turned inward, where so many Jews are hiding their identities out of fear. American Jewish Committee released our State of Anti-Semitism in America report just a couple of months ago. It's the first comprehensive data that reflects the feelings of the Jewish community in America for the period since October 7th. We found that nearly 3/4 of American Jews feel less secure than a year ago. And a majority, 56%, admit that they have changed their behavior over the last year out of fear of anti-Semitism. That is, 56% of members of the Jewish community changed what they wore, what they said, where they went, how they appeared in public out of fear of anti-Semitism. People are deciding not to wear dog tags or a yellow pin out of fear that they'll be targeted. Some aren't going to synagogue or visibly wearing kippot because they think that being identified as Jews puts them at risk. That's the reality that we find ourselves living in the United States in 2025. We stand at a crossroads in our history. We have watched anti-Semitism surge on campuses, in the streets, in the media, and what was once unthinkable too often is now a regular part of our reality. But what I'd like to do tonight is to do more than just talk about the problem. I want to take you behind the scenes into the work that I've been doing for years in Congress, but most importantly, the work that we've been doing at AJC. The U.S. national strategy to combat anti-Semitism was shaped just in the last year of the last administration. And the work that we have to do to help, that we did to help implement it then, and that we need to continue to do across the country, across society, is what we all must participate in to ensure that this moment of darkness does not, cannot define our future. So let me share a bit about the experiences that I had when I was in Congress leading up to this, where I saw firsthand how critical global diplomacy was in fighting anti-Semitism, how much time I spent working with AJC and other organizations in the Jewish community. In the early part of the 21st century, in the early mid-2010s, we saw this spike in anti-Semitism around the world. Jewish cemeteries vandalized in France, fatal shooting at a Jewish school in Toulouse in 2012, a deadly shooting at the Jewish Museum in Brussels in 2014, a shooting at a synagogue in Copenhagen in 2015. And then in Paris, we all remember the kosher supermarket that was targeted at the height of pre-Shabbat shopping, killing 4. At an event that AJC organized with leaders from the German, French, Belgian, Dutch, and English embassies, I was in Congress and I participated. At the time, we couldn't fathom what European Jews were going through. My friend Jeff Goldberg's been in the news a lot lately. At the time, if you recall, he got a lot of attention for writing a cover story in the Atlantic about whether Jews should leave Europe. That's the way that we were thinking about things then. And we saw what was happening, and for those of us who had occasion and the privilege of visiting Europe, we were appalled that outside of every synagogue there was an armed guard. The steps that you had to go through just to get into a Jewish institution in Europe. And after that meeting that we had with all of these leaders from around the world, we launched a bipartisan task force in Congress to fight anti-Semitism because of anti-Semitism over there in Europe. At the same time that I was in Congress doing all that we could to shed light and to fight the surge in anti-Semitism abroad, there was also important work being done to engage with diplomats and European leaders. Another story. I represented the city of Parkland when I was a member of Congress, where there was a horrific shooting on Valentine's Day in 2018 at the Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School. And it defined, in so many ways, my approach to young people, the way that I approached my work in Congress for the rest of the time that I was there. And I went out of my way, whenever I could, to speak to young people. And I had an opportunity to speak to this incredible graduating group of high school students that were graduating. They were graduating from a leadership development program, and the program was finishing on a Saturday morning, and I had this incredible experience with this wonderfully diverse group of students talking about the role of young people and what they can achieve and what they can learn from the horrors that we had experienced in Parkland. As I walked out on that morning, October 27th, just 7 months after the shooting in Parkland, I looked at my phone, and I think it's safe to say most of us remember this morning as well, this terrible morning in October, when the word started coming that there was a shooting in Pittsburgh at Tree of Life. And what we then realized that what was happening in Europe, what had happened, what had so enraged us and terrified us, had now come here. And it was in Pittsburgh, and it was in Poway, and it was in Kansas City, and Colleyville, and Muncie, and Jersey City, in Boston, in New York City, where a man was arrested after making credible threats to attack a synagogue. And after that arrest, police recovered semi-automatic firearms with extended magazines and a Nazi armband in the man's apartment. That's what we were then focused on and dealing with. And we were looking for ways to fight anti-Semitism then. Before leaving Congress, I had to deliver a speech to my colleagues about anti-Semitic tropes that had been advanced by one of my colleagues, by a fellow member of Congress. And on the House floor, I had to explain then, as it rings true, sadly, so powerfully now, I said, because of anti-Semitism over millennia, millions of Jews have been hunted, targeted, expelled from their countries, violently attacked, killed, and exterminated. Words lead to action and to death. And as I asked then, as the community wondered then, and as it brings us forward to the post-10/7 world, why are we so often unable to singularly condemn anti-Semitism? Why can't we call out anti-Semitism and show that we have learned the lessons of history? And that's the work that I have tried to do, that we do at AJC, that so many of us have done across the community since October 7th. When anti-Semitism surged in the US, we took the lessons that we learned abroad and we brought them here. AJC offered a plan that outlined concrete and targeted steps for leaders to take to help better understand anti-Semitism, to respond to it, and to prevent anti-Semitism. back before October 7th, I was still in Congress, and I got to know the second gentleman, Doug Emhoff, who I think we all came to understand didn't expect that when his wife became the vice president, that he would be the person who took the lead in the administration in thinking about how to fight anti-Semitism. It wasn't something that he expected to deal with, but he threw himself into it. And so in December of 2022, as the CEO of AJC, second gentleman hosted a meeting of all the Jewish organizations, major Jewish organizations in America. It was a round table because he wanted to hear from all of us how to combat the anti-Semitism that was then surging here. They wanted to hear from Jewish leaders about what we thought should be done. And when the second gentleman turned to me, and as I just explained, we had already put out this detailed plan calling for action across all of society, because it takes all of society, all of government, to confront and combat anti-Semitism. He turned to me and asked what he thought we should do, what should come next, what could come from this meeting that could actually be a meaningful response to the anti-Semitism that was even then on the rise. And I suggested exactly what we had done. And the administration decided that for the first time ever, there should be a national strategy here in the United States to counter anti-Semitism. And that's what they embarked upon. And because of what happened in Europe, and because AJC had over years worked with governments across Europe to help them create national strategies to combat anti-Semitism and to foster Jewish life, and to create special envoy positions dedicated to fighting anti-Semitism, we brought those special envoys from Europe here to the United States, from the UK and from Germany, from the Netherlands, Norway, and the Organization of American States in Latin America. We brought them to the White House, where they spent hours. One White House official told me that she had never seen any White House meeting go on as long as this had without anyone getting up to leave. They came to share their own experiences about what they had learned in their countries, so that as the administration wrote its own plan, they could benefit from the insight and the experience that Europe had already endured. And as a result of all of that input, the White House launched the U.S. National Strategy to Counter Anti-Semitism. And it included many of the action items in our own call to action against anti-Semitism. It was an historic moment in the fight against anti-Semitism. But crafting the strategy was just the start. There was enormous work that had to be done to help implement it. That's why we launched a task force to do exactly that. We had to help the U.S. Conference of Mayors take concrete steps to counter anti-Semitism in their own communities. We had to work with the Small Business Administration to make sure that they were empowering businesses to take meaningful steps to fight Jew hatred. We helped conduct anti-Semitism trainings with companies around the country, including here in Silicon Valley, with NBA teams, again, across the country, with elected officials, with community partners, all helping them understand that if we're going to defeat anti-Semitism, if we're going to take the anti-Semites and push them back under the rocks where they belong, it takes all of us. One more moment. October 6th, 2023. On October 6th, I was leading an AJC delegation to our office in Abu Dhabi. We were there to celebrate the hopeful future that we all look forward to as a result of the Abraham Accords. It was one of the best nights of my professional life as leaders from the United States and Israel, the United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain sat together for Shabbat dinner. And toasted the feeling of unity that we experienced in that room and the hope for what was to come. And then just a few hours later, my wife shook me and woke me up. She said, "You need to look at your phone. There's something terrible happening in Israel." October 7th was the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust, and what followed was a new inferno of anti-Semitism. And it started before Israel even responded. Let's remember those first protests that we saw had nothing to do with the way Israel and the IDF behaved in defense of their own country, because there was not yet a single IDF soldier who had gone into Gaza to defend Israel. Those early protests were about one thing. It was a celebration of Hamas and the slaughter that had just occurred. And then we saw what happened on college campuses all across America, all around the world, in fact. And most campuses were not immune. We saw this everywhere. Stanford was not immune. Encampments, Jews and Zionists being left out of progressive spaces, protesters chanting horrific things at Jewish and Israeli students. Earlier today, I met with the chair of the Stanford Board of Trustees, and we discussed the steps that Stanford has taken and is now taking to confront the anti-Semitism that Jewish students have faced. And we've come a long way from those early encampments that we saw here and all around the country. And I was heartened by the commitment from the leadership of Stanford, to fight anti-Semitism with an understanding that anti-Semitism never just affects the Jews. And in fact, on a college campus, it is the fundamental notion of what higher education in America should be that is at risk if we don't confront anti-Semitism that seeks to silence an entire viewpoint on campus. This meeting came on the heels of our meeting earlier this week with the chair of the Board of Regents of the UC system. Bias, it is clear, and we made this point in the national strategy, and we made this point again this week. The bias of any kind can have no place in the classroom. Jews and Zionists should not have to feel afraid or threatened or feel the need to hide or shy away from their identities. That's what we have come to realize so clearly over the past year and a half. The last administration created a national strategy. I talked about the ways we work to implement it. There's a new administration that is dealing with anti-Semitism in its own way. But we all need to be doing more to bring this common sense notion of what we should expect in our schools, both K-12 and universities, right here in California. This moment demands that students, we are reminded, should be educated in class and not indoctrinated in class. Educational spaces, so many of which, we have to be honest, the Jewish community abandoned, not the campuses. Hillel's, Chabad's, other groups have done great work on campuses, but as a community, we ceded the playing field to those who have been organizing for decades against us. This is the moment to transform our educational spaces. We've got to rededicate ourselves to work here in California, for example, to work with the state to ensure that required ethnic studies programs, that the curriculum that's required in high schools across this state do not allow blatantly anti-Semitic lessons to be spread. And as we do this, we've got to continue to reiterate our commitment to our students learning about marginalized stories in class, that our history, the Jewish community's history, is so vital and important to America's history. And we've got to remind anyone who will listen that lessons that seek to demonize Israel and impose a definition of Jewishness on our own community do not live up to the standards envisioned by the state legislature or by the governor. Everyone in this state needs to understand that. These efforts go hand in hand. I want to again be clear about something. Anti-Semitism in education is not just a Jewish issue. It is a test, ultimately, it is a test of our democracy. Today's college students, let's be clear, and I think I can say this here, and you would agree, wherever you went to school, given where we're gathering, we can agree that today's college students, those graduating from Stanford, those graduating from UC, in particular, given this place, these are the future leaders in our society. They're business leaders, political leaders. What we're doing on campus right now in fighting back against anti-Semitism doesn't just benefit the Jewish community. It helps to ensure that that generation of leaders coming from these universities will be in a better position to understand who we are and to fight back against lies about who we are not. If we allow anti-Semitism to be normalized, it will be normalized in boardrooms, in courtrooms, in government offices. That's why it's not enough to simply condemn what is happening in our classrooms and on our campuses. We have to engage with the leaders who can change it. We must, and we do, meet directly with university presidents and administrators. We did it here, we do this all around the country, and be a resource for them as they seek to combat anti-Semitism. And we have to be an indispensable resource for schools in their fight against anti-Semitism by forging trusting relationships with the leaders of these schools so that they will seek us out and work as they do in so many parts of the country right now to help reflect the lived experiences of Jews in America right now. Today in America, anti-Semitic violence and displays of anti-Semitism have too often become a reality. Just this week, here in the Bay Area, in Morgan Hill, on Highway 101 that I just drove on earlier today, there was a swastika flown above the highway underpass. It's why this institutional action that we engage in is not enough. It's why it's important, again, to make clear that anti-Semitism threatens society itself, and it's why a whole-of-society approach has to be the one that we champion. When a Jew is harassed on a subway for wearing a Jewish star, that is a warning sign for everyone in our society. When Kanye's obscene anti-Semitic screeds are dismissed as just the ravings of a mental health episode, that is a warning sign for everyone. We've got to meet this moment by demanding that everyone acknowledge that we are all in this together. We have to educate business leaders about what it means to be a Jew in America. We have to push tech companies to combat the spread of anti-Semitism online. We should expect our social media companies, the platforms that are so important in our country, to enforce their own rules against hate speech. And we should call on our elected officials to support strong legislation to clamp down on anti-Semitism wherever it might rear its ugly head. So there is a new administration now. I'll close with this. And this is the moment in any talk I give, for those of you who have heard me, one day I will feel it unnecessary to do this, but that day has not yet arrived. I was once, as you heard, a Democratic member of Congress. I am now the proud CEO of a fiercely nonpartisan organization. Fiercely nonpartisan. And by the way, it feels really great. And so, regardless of how anyone feels about President Trump or his administration, whether you love him and everything he does, or you find, you have grave concern over any number of his actions, there's one thing that at AJC and that I would suggest the community as a whole ought to do, and that is acknowledge that the White House is making the fight against anti-Semitism a priority. It should be clear to everyone, even as we're working to urge the Trump administration to take this whole of society approach, just as the last administration does, that any such action is unlikely to be framed as a continuation of the plan that is viewed by this White House as the Biden plan. I've met with members of the Trump administration. We see them as partners when we can strengthen the fight on behalf of the Jewish people, the fight against anti-Semitism, and our shared efforts to defend Israel's place in the world. There are positives and negatives in every administration, and I think it's important for us to acknowledge that. We work closely with the Biden administration on issues and opportunities that were important to the Jewish community, and we were critical when we needed to be. It's the same approach that we're taking with the Trump administration. Earlier this month, I wrote to the Federal Task Force on Anti-Semitism. This is the task force that the Trump administration has created. And I expressed appreciation for holding Columbia University accountable for its egregious record of anti-Semitism. I also, again, important I think for us to be clear in how we approach these issues. Even as we were thanking the administration for taking very meaningful action, we also expressed concerns that life-saving scientific research and other critical fields that have little connection to the areas where the anti-Semitism at Columbia was actually happening could be hurt by across-the-board cuts. And this action, I think, sums up our approach to this moment. We are trying to meet this moment just as all of you are. We spoke out about our appreciation for holding Columbia accountable, and at the same time expressed concerns about its impact of that particular action and how it went about doing it on broader issues that also matter to the Jewish community. And after 60 colleges and universities received notices just recently, just last week, from the task force for potential violations regarding anti-Semitism on campus, we reached out to every one of those 60 universities, many of which we've worked closely with now for several years, to make sure that they understand that in this fight, regardless, we tried to make the same argument to them, regardless of how they view the way the administration may be going about this, AJC stands ready to work with them, to provide resources, to provide counseling, to help guide them in ways that can help protect the Jewish community on their campus, respond to rising anti-Semitism, and simultaneously address the concerns of the Trump administration. And many of the university presidents that we reached out to, some of whom we were critical of in the way they handled the post-10/7 challenges, were the first ones to respond, taking us up on our offer, glad that we'll stand with them in helping them address this problem. We're taking advantage of the moment that we have because of the administration's focus on anti-Semitism. And I do understand, that for people in this social media-driven age, that it is sometimes hard to pause and to acknowledge the importance of nuance. But especially at a time when there is no such thing. On social media, as I like to point out, outrage is always at level 10. Same thing is true on most cable news shows. Same thing is true more and more in most media outlets. The work that we do at AJC recognizes that to be impactful, to actually be able to affect change, you have to be engaged, you have to be committed to the work, as all of us are, and you have to be thoughtful. And if you're not thoughtful and you don't recognize the importance of nuance, then you're pushed to one of the extremes and you're viewed as either a leftist group or a right-wing group, and you're not taken seriously enough by all of the people who wish to engage in this process, regardless of what your politics are. So I want to leave you with this. We are no doubt at a challenging moment for the Jewish community. And I also want to be clear, apathy is a choice. It's a choice. But what we do now, what we do at this time in our history, will help determine whether what we're experiencing is a blip or a breaking point for the Jewish community. This moment in history will be written, and here's what I want to remind all of us. We have agency in what that history looks like, and we will decide, all of us, we will decide how that history will read. But listen carefully. If all we do is fight anti-Semitism, if all we do is be defined by those who are out to get us, then the anti-Semites win. We cannot play defense forever. We cannot define ourselves. We cannot define ourselves only in opposition to anti-Semitism. It is not enough to talk about what we are fighting against. We have to always remember what we are fighting for. And it is not, and at this moment, that's clear. We've seen the data here in the United States. In America, 56% of Jews have changed their behavior. In the UK, Jewish parents are teaching their children not to wear kippot in public. In our own country, in so many places, Jewish students are avoiding certain places on campus. Well, we win when those numbers come down. And remember what the Jewish people have given to every community in which we have lived throughout our history. Remember that, and as I gather here with this wonderful Jewish community, I say to you as clearly as I can, in our effort to fight back, here's what we need to do. We need to be Jewish. We need to be proudly and unapologetically and loudly Jewish. We need to wear the hostage dog tags and the yellow ribbons, God willing, only for another day until every one of the hostages comes home. And we need to feel comfortable wearing kippot. And we have to put on that Hebrew t-shirt. We have to affix mezuzahs everywhere that they will be seen by the public. We should learn Jewish history. And we should tell the world that the Jewish and democratic modern state of Israel is a miracle. It is a miracle that has the same right to exist as every other country in the world, and it is a miracle country that contributes more to the world in so many ways than virtually every other country, and certainly so much more than a country of its size should. And we need to tell, and we need to tell our children and our grandchildren to never, ever be afraid of who we are, and to make sure that they're always proud telling the world who they are. We will create, all of us in this room, all of us in the Jewish community, we will create a world where Jews thrive. We will fight anti-Semitism on our own terms. And all of us here, we will unite to write the brighter future for Israel and the Jewish people that we know we can. My friends, that is how we win this battle. I am so grateful for the opportunity to be here. Thank you for having me. Keep up the unbelievable work, and Am Yisrael Chai. All right. I've been told to stay here. I'm happy to. Do I see refreshments in the other room? It's not open yet. The other refreshment room is not open yet. Yeah.
Hi. So in your meeting with the, how's that? In your meeting with with Stanford earlier this week or this morning, can you tell us what the steps are that they are taking on?
Yeah. Well, the question is, what steps is Stanford taking here on campus? And many, I assume, this community has been a part of, but there is for us, there are some significant steps that Stanford has that we're I think particularly excited about because they go beyond what other campuses have done. For example, there is an acknowledgement, and this is something we've been stressing on every campus since we first started engaging after October 7th. There is an acknowledgement that anti-Semitic acts, when they occur, have to be not just taken seriously. It's got to be clear where to report. It's got to be clear that there's going to be accountability. It's got to be clear that the student who reports the act of anti-Semitism actually receives a response so that they're not making a cry into a black hole. All of those are significant. That the code of student conduct, again, is actually applied, and that when there are violations, again, there is accountability. And in what is, I think, unique among so many of the campuses we've seen, in addition to having students acknowledge the existence of a code of student conduct, the new student letter, the admissions letter, the new student letter lays out thoughtfully what's expected of students on campus, why, and the curriculum changes that now require students to be able to engage in difficult conversations with one another rather than having students simply flock to campus and take positions pitted against one another. I mean, some of those are going to take time to have impact, but we think it's interesting. We think that there's real potential, and at least in the conversations that we had, the idea that fighting anti-Semitism, as I said earlier, is in the best interest not just of the Jewish community, but in lifting up the entire community. That idea seems to be central to their approach, which we're grateful for, and which we'll work. We intend to work with them to help ensure that that's the direction that they go.
Hi.
Oh, hi.
Thank you for, it's working? Thank you for your encouragement. I do have a question. What can you tell us about the difference between the anti-Semitism before the establishment of Israel and after the establishment of Israel, whether there is some changes in the characteristic of the anti-Semitism, and also if you can tell us something about the connection between the anti-Semitism and the rise of anti-Zionism or anti-Israelism that is happening now.
Sure. First, in the United States, I would make it. I wouldn't necessarily draw the distinction between pre-1948 and post-1948 anti-Semitism. In fact, in the United States, I think we can agree, as far as anti-Semitism goes, the Jewish community has had a really good run, right? There was in so many parts of America, there was a different kind of anti-Semitism. Obviously, it was problematic, the kind of anti-Semitism that kept Jews out of certain neighborhoods, out of certain country clubs. That was anti-Semitism that needed to be confronted as well, but it was generally reserved. There was an understanding that outright anti-Semitism is something that might be discussed quietly. It wasn't screaming out in the open. And then as far as Israel goes, I mean, after 1967, especially first the founding of Israel in 48, and then after the Six-Day War, Israel was celebrated across the United States. If you fast forward to where we are now, and the issue of anti-Zionism, again, there was a debate, right? I'm sure on campuses here, people love to debate whether anti-Zionism was really anti-Semitism, and maybe we could draw a distinction. After October 7th, when the protesters went out in the streets, immediately after what happened, with the signs advertising the rallies that had hang gliders on them, that the terrorists use, it was clear, it should have been clear once and for all, that this debate, the mask is off. There's no hiding what these anti-Zionists are all about. They're about the same thing because they told us in those rallies, they told us by wearing Palestinian Islamic Jihad headbands and carrying Hezbollah flags, they told us that their goal is the same goal as Hamas, which is the destruction of Israel and massacre of Jews. That's the anti-Zionism that we're fighting today, that has sprung into the open, that has become so violent and so concerning. It's why, in the university context especially, why we're so focused on campuses, because that's so often where we see it.
Mr. Deutch, I have another question about campus anti-Semitism. Thank you so much for coming also.
Sure.
I really appreciate what you brought up about Columbia. I think it's very important. A number of other Zionist American groups like ADL or Beitar have come out strongly in favor of the current administration's tactics, including suspending due process and limiting the freedom of speech. I was wondering, as a president and a CEO of another large Zionist American Jewish group, do you support the limiting of due process in the fight against anti-Semitism?
No, this is a really important question. What's your name?
Ben.
Ben, thanks for the question. I gave the example of the decision to cut across the board to cut funding for Columbia, but on the issue of due process, we can't give up on due process. The whole idea if we're going to use the fight against anti-Semitism to strengthen America and to strengthen American democracy, then the fight against anti-Semitism, it's not a question of which is more important, fighting anti-Semitism or respecting the Constitution and due process. They go hand in hand. And if we're going to be able to enlist the broad cross-section of America with us in that fight, we have to acknowledge that. That's why when Khalil was taken and the conversation about deportation has started, we made very clear that, first of all, we have to acknowledge that what he said and did were horrific and odious, and we have to make that point. Also, the university should have taken action previously against him, also important. But at the same time, as we pointed out when we talked about it in our statement, and when we've talked about it since, it doesn't mean that due process goes away. That you have to recognize due process as well. Ultimately, a court is going to decide, and if the court decides that due process was given to him and still deportation is appropriate, that's the way the system should work. But we can't get ahead. We're going to have an enormous challenge. Again, we're going to have a huge challenge succeeding in making clear what I said before, what we know, which is fighting anti-Semitism is in the best interest of all of us in standing up for democracy. If in the fight against anti-Semitism, it becomes our position that democracy is no longer important as part of that fight. They have to be intertwined.
So have you given that to the Trump administration?
I'm sorry?
Have you told the Trump administration that you do not support suspending due process?
We don't support suspending due process, and that's why we've been clear. In this case in particular, and in other cases, the court system really matters here. We don't have to get ahead of. Neither AJC nor any other Jewish organization can stand in the place of our judicial system. We respect the judicial system in enforcing due process, as they will. And we're going to respect what the court says, and we would certainly expect that the administration would respect what the court says as well. That is
They denied
not,
the court order.
that is exactly how this really important battle that is taking place should be waged. Again, I want to acknowledge, as I did before, that the fact that this is a priority for the administration really matters. At the same time, ensuring that in this fight against anti-Semitism, we go about it in a way that also acknowledges the importance of the Constitution also matters. Again, they go hand in hand, and if we respect both of them, we will have more people working with us in fighting anti-Semitism and strengthening the Jewish community in America.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you
Hi.
for your speech. I have a question. This is about the elephant in the room. How do you fight against Jewish anti-Semites? I'm talking about useful idiots like Norm Finkelstein, Holocaust Industry, I'm sure you've heard the name,
Yeah.
or Jewish Voice for Peace, or all those fringe organizations. They're a tiny minority, but they're very vocal. And every time you turn on TV, they're in the middle of it, and Jews for Palestine, and so at least you can fight against real, normal anti-Semites, but how do we fight against Jewish anti-Semites? That question never been addressed, so I just thought maybe you can. Thank you. And I just want to be clear about something. I'm going to answer your question. I'm going to start, though, by making clear there is no such thing as normal anti-Semites. Anti-Semites, the fact that anyone is an anti-Semite, by definition, in my book, means that they are not normal. Let me be clear about that. So, I don't distinguish. Yeah, I can't tell, although we try. I've had lots of conversations with media outlets, sometimes successfully, oftentimes not at all, where we try to help them understand that if they're putting someone on, you can't by having what I refer to as a Jew crowd, right? The people who come on TV and say, as a Jew, I hate Israel. I hate everything about Israel. I think Israel has no right to exist. And because I'm a Jew, I have a right to say that. And therefore, you should view me as a representative of the Jewish people. We make clear, and I think we all have an obligation to make clear, that it's not just what we feel, it's what we know. The data is our own data. AJC's State of Anti-Semitism report makes clear. I mean, the overwhelming majority of Jews in America, for the overwhelming majority of Jews, Israel is a central part of their identity. That's the point that we have to make when we go out and we do battle. I don't want to spend all of my time trying to differentiate how I take on someone who says Israel has no right to exist and is not a Jew, and someone else who says Israel has no right to exist and is a Jew. In my book, I'm going to fight them both as hard as I possibly can.
Hi, my name is, can you hear me? My name is Heidi Isips, and my husband and I are visiting from Los Gatos, and we're members of Shir Chadash, which is South Bay.
Where's last name?
South Bay of this area, so just a few minutes south of here. But so I'm an instructor.
You're not from Petaluma.
Yeah, not quite so far.
Okay.
But I'm an instructor at San Jose State University, which is nearly 40,000 students. So it's right down the way. So not a UC, but it's one of 23 CSUs, California State Universities. The anti-Semitism in the CSU is pervasive, and it is pervasive among faculty, staff, and presidents. And I can tell you because I was an award-winning lecturer, and I'm basically out of work now because of October 7th, because I'm an outspoken, proud Jew and Zionist. And I just got a message on LinkedIn from one of my students saying how hateful it is I am a Zionist. And so what I would say is that there's an indoctrination, like you talked about pre-1948, post-19, there's an indoctrination that happened way before. It's gone on 20, 30 years, and it's talked about in this October 8th movie, which you can all see at AMC Saratoga. Please go see it. But it's gone on. So I agree with you completely that the playing field at the campuses got seeded. I and other faculty felt extremely abandoned. It was a very scary time, and I'm still kind of not recovered from it. But where do we go from here, those of us who want to fight for the unindoctrination of our young people? Because Hillel's one thing, but like, how do we work in a good way together? What is your organization doing it? What organizations do you think are fighting this fight? Because it is very pervasive that good faculty members think Zionism is evil, and they're purveying this in their classes, and it's extremely deep-rooted. It didn't explode just on October 7th. It was there before.
Well, I am sure by that presentation that your award is well deserved. I thank you for sharing that with us. I'm going to do this. I'm going to just ask Seth and Teresa to stand up for a second, and so that everyone can see. Seth and Teresa are my colleagues and here in the Bay Area, and your contacts, and I'm going to ask that afterward you speak with Seth and Teresa, and that anyone else who would like to engage in this battle, I would say on your own is worth doing, but now, what's your name?
Heidi Isips.
Now everyone should want to come just to be on Heidi's side. Please see Seth and Teresa. We're happy to try to be helpful.
I think I'm next. This kind of follows up on the last couple of points, and we know a lot about what's going on at Stanford. So there is the Anti-Semitism Committee that's done a great report. You may know simultaneously there is a very aggressive report by the anti-Islamophobic, the Islamic community. It's even more demanding than the, of course, they're not reasonable. We are so reasonable. So the question really focuses on the extent to which you're working to directly combat those forces, because we can be over here doing 12 things when they're over doing 14, and at worst it's a tie. Maybe we lose. Yeah. And what's going on at San Jose State and all these campuses, it's the faculty which are constantly hiring other faculty. So it's kind of a reinforcing thing with many dominant forces that are against us in the middle of our campuses. So comments. So
yes, I'm very familiar. There are two different issues. Just on the issue of faculty, whether it's at San Jose State or at Stanford or at so many other places, making sure, and this came up and that we raised this in the conversations, that we had today and that we've been having all week. Last summer, AJC really encouraged universities to focus on their codes of student conduct. This summer, as the academic year comes to an end, I guess a little later here, we're really urging universities to focus on faculty behavior, on the echo chambers that get created where anti-Jewish, anti-Israeli hatred starts to seep out from into the university. So that's something that we're really encouraging them to focus on. Specifically, in this case, I am familiar with that report, and there are two different approaches. One is, as you point out, the demanding approach that says we want more of this and you should do more of this and take these actions, and the anti-Semitism report, which, again, consistent with the conversation we've been having, says, look, fighting anti-Semitism actually is good for the entire, we're not asking to be pitted against other groups. It's good for the entire campus. That's the idea behind the new student letter that we were talking to them about today. That's what we are really pushing. That the way forward here is to stop this idea that in order to fight anti-Semitism, you somehow, it's the whole issue, like you have to pit one group against another. We ought to be able, as I said on the House floor 6 years ago, we ought to be able to condemn anti-Semitism on its own, because by fighting it on its own, we're going to be helping the entire university culture. That's the approach that we think universities should take, and that's the response to the other approach that obviously we disagree with.
I have two points.
No, hi.
One, if we don't address the funding that underlies the protests on campuses that were pre-arranged, paid for, and so forth, and organized, from gutter, from care, and so forth, then that's going to go on forever. And I don't know if AJC is looking at that, but that has to be looked at. The second action that everybody can take is if we know our assemblyman, there's a bill reaching the floor of the California Assembly, 1468, which is attempting to put guardrails about what can actually be taught in K through 12 in the local high schools, including making it a graduation requirement, okay? 1468, all you have to do is talk to your assembly member, write, call, email, whatever, and say that you support 1468 and ask them to become a co-sponsor. I've been doing that with our assemblyman, and he has signed on to be a co-sponsor of the bill. There are over 40 assembly people who have already co-sponsored this bill. This will prevent the teaching of liberated ethnic studies or critical race theory in the high schools, which of course are incredibly dangerous.
Yeah. Thank you for your advocacy. I will say it is an important bill that can be even stronger than it. Right. And we've been working. Seth and our team have been working to help strengthen that bill so that there is no question that the goal of putting these guardrails in place are guardrails that actually will ensure will prevent liberated ethnic studies from seeping in. Again, see Seth and Teresa. We will give you lots more information about how you can engage on that. As to funding, yeah, I'll say a few things. I recently met with a group of AJC leaders. We met with the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee and the chairman of the Education Committee in Washington. In the Foreign Affairs Committee, this goes back actually to the last administration, where the Director of National Intelligence was very clear that she thinks that Iranian money was funding some of what we've seen across the country. In talking to university presidents, it is pretty clear that on most campuses there is a small group that is leading these efforts, and the funding piece has to be. They've got to chase this down. Congress is looking into this. We've encouraged them to hold hearings about this. At the same time, there are a number of lawsuits that we're familiar with, where we've spoken with the folks who are helping to push these lawsuits forward, that aim very specifically at again, making clear the connection between SJP, AMP, the foreign funding that we know is playing a role here. There have been significant steps forward. That's going to take a little more time, but yes, it's a really important issue.
I'm going to actually, I'm going to have the prerogative of one last question, which I'm going to steal here, because I have the microphone. So you mentioned holding social media companies accountable for the anti-Semitism in their echo chambers and their algorithms. And I'm curious, because I also heard you talk about democracy, and I would like to hear what you think can be done specifically by the large social media companies without getting in the way of free speech, because it's a tough battle, and there are a lot of people here who would like to be helpful and who probably could be helpful if you could give us some specific examples.
Sure. The question was, how do we make sure social media companies are being responsible and also ensure that that free speech is protected? I would just say this. One of the things I did in Congress when I wasn't working on Israel, U.S.-Israel relationship and fighting anti-Semitism, I served on the Judiciary Committee. I spent a lot of time thinking about these issues exactly. There are the policy approaches, which I won't bother anyone with. Everyone here knows the battles in Washington. I'm going to be candid. Everyone knows the kinds of steps that Congress could take if it wanted to try to try to impose liability on companies if they don't do it. There's every reason to believe, based on everything we've seen from this administration, that is that is just not likely to be pursued. It hasn't been thus far. I'm going to push that to the side, because here's how you can help. If you work for one of the social media companies, if you are married to someone who works for the social media companies, if your neighbor happens to be someone, what we're asking, and we've made this request directly and repeatedly to senior leaders at YouTube and X, the CEOs of X and TikTok and Meta, we've been very clear. This is not a question of free speech. There are rules that the companies have put in place, their own rules, that we're just asking them to enforce. As an executive at one of these companies put it to me the other day, I won't tell you which one, she said, look, and AJC is working with them, and we value these relationships, and we've been brought in to try to help identify some of the challenges. We've had successes. I think the fact that Meta acknowledged that there is, and we warned companies of this immediately after October 7th, and we saw this happen, that what you cannot say on social media about dirty Jews, evil Jews, that's not going to be permitted. But we told them it's only going to be a matter of time before people just start using Zionist instead of Jew. And it's exactly what happened. Meta, to their credit, took action. We worked with them. They recognize that. The algorithm now deals with that. As this executive told me just the other day, yes, we have our rules. We're pretty good. We're very good, she said. We're very good at dealing with the rule against inciting terrorism. She said, we're not as good, she acknowledged, we're not as good at the hate and harassment pillars. All we're asking is, for the sake of our democracy and free speech, that the companies make it a priority to get better at enforcing the rules in the hate and harassment pillars for the benefit of the Jewish community and ultimately for the benefit of everyone who uses the platforms, so that they can be used the way they were intended and not as purveyors of hate and anti-Semitism that only seek to enrage. That's what we hope to accomplish. That's the work that we're doing out here on a regular basis. We're grateful for the relationships that we have. We want to do, we think we can do even more, and that's the message I would ask all of you to take to all of your friends and neighbors. AJC stands ready to work with the companies to help make that happen. I am happy to stick around and answer more questions, but as is always the case, every time I talk, the best part of the evening is the Q&A. Thank you for proving that yet again, and thanks for having me.
So thank you very much, Ted, for coming and inspiring us, for being patient and answering questions. I want to thank Beth Jayak for presenting this program tonight, and also to all our co-sponsors, to Peninsula Sinai Congregation, to Kol Emet, to Beth Ami Israel Committee, to Beth Jacob, to Beth on Women, to Congregation MF Barakah, and to the B'nai Israel Jewish Center in Petaluma. I'd also like to thank all of you for coming today. Before you leave, I'd like quickly to see a show of hands. How many of you have voted in the World Zionist Congress election? Oh, I am so happy. Very nice. Well, for the few of you who haven't, you can do that on the way out. The WZC election is an important way for diaspora Jews to have a say in the allocation of over $1 billion annually to support Israel and world Jewry. It also affects policies such as who is counted as Jewish, who can make Aliyah, which rabbis are recognized, and will LGBT marriage continue to be recognized and valid in Israel. The election is about standing up for our values of equality, democracy, pluralism, and finding a path to peace. I'm not going to continue because I don't want to be the one who stands between you and the food and the drink. It takes literally 3 minutes of your time to vote and $5 from your Venmo. Please do stop on the way out. People will help you. Thanks again for joining us this evening. Enjoy the reception.